Yes, Dolphins. Things are heating up around the Miami Dolphins, and there is something very important we need to talk about. We all know the offensive line can change everything for a football team, and after what happened in the joint practice with the Giants, Miami simply cannot ignore this situation. I really want to see the Dolphins competing for something special this season, and if this team wants to surprise people, it has to start by winning the battle up front. The Giants' pass rush gave Miami a very difficult day in practice, but we already saw something similar happen against Washington before the Dolphins' offensive line responded with a dominant 96-yard touchdown drive in the actual preseason game. So I want to know which side you're on. Do you believe this offensive line will bounce back again when the game starts? Or did what happened against the Giants expose a real problem for Miami? Write your opinion in the comments. And if you've been a Miami Dolphins fan for more than 15 years, hit that like button hard. All right, my friends, let's talk about this offensive line and why Saturday could tell us a lot about where these Dolphins really stand. The biggest story coming out of Thursday's joint practice was simple. The Giants' pass rush gave Miami's offense a very difficult day. Brian Burns was described as the best player on the field, and New York's front created problems throughout the practice. That immediately puts the Dolphins' offensive line under the spotlight heading into Saturday. And this is important because Miami has already seen something similar happen. During the joint practice with Washington, the Commanders' pass rush also caused problems for the Dolphins. But when the actual preseason game arrived, Miami's offensive line responded. The starting group opened the game with an excellent drive, marching 96 yards for a touchdown. The Dolphins faced only one third down during that entire possession, and the offensive line helped establish the kind of physical football this new staff wants to play. That drive included a strong start on the ground. Devon Achane finished that opening possession with around 39 rushing yards on 7 carries and scored from 1 yard out. So now the question is whether Miami can do it again. Can this offensive line have a difficult joint practice and then look completely different when the game starts? That matters because the Dolphins want running the football to become part of their identity. They want to be physical. They want to win battles at the line of scrimmage. They want to give themselves a chance to stay in games by controlling the football and doing the basic things correctly. Saturday gives us another opportunity to see whether that plan is actually beginning to take shape. Of course, there's one major question hanging over this matchup. How many Giants defensive starters will actually play? If New York puts some of its top defensive players on the field, Miami gets a much stronger test. If the Giants sit most of those players, then the Dolphins need to do exactly what they did against Washington's backups. Take care of business. Either way, there really isn't an excuse for Miami to come out looking overwhelmed. Jeff Hafley has already said the Dolphins starters need to be ready to play. That was also the message before the previous preseason game, when the starters ultimately played one full series on each side of the ball. So there's reason to believe we could see something similar again. And if that happens, I'm watching Miami's first offensive possession very closely. Last week, that first drive was probably everything the coaching staff could have wanted. 96 yards, a touchdown, 1/3 down, and a huge Caleb Douglas one-handed catch on a slot fade along the way. That is exactly what you want in the preseason. Get your starters on the field. Let them execute. Put points on the board. Get them out of the game healthy. Then turn the rest of the afternoon over to the players fighting for jobs. Can Miami repeat that formula? That's one of the biggest questions of this game.
And even though the Giants' pass rush dominated much of Thursday's practice, Miami apparently still found some success running the football. Achane had some good runs up the middle, including one play that created plenty of discussion about just how far he would have gone in a real game. There was even video of a play where Achane appeared to escape pressure in the backfield before bursting into open space. That's the kind of explosiveness everybody knows he can bring. But this game is not only about the starters. Once the first unit leaves the field, one of Miami's biggest concerns becomes impossible to ignore: the backup quarterback situation. The quarterback play against Washington was extremely poor. The numbers were ugly, and now the situation has changed again because Quinn is out this week after suffering an injury in that game. That moves Kim Miller from the third-string role into the second-string quarterback spot, and suddenly Saturday becomes a massive opportunity for him. Miller needs to show improvement. This isn't only about whether he can make one or two impressive throws. Miami needs competent quarterback play because bad quarterback play makes it almost impossible to properly evaluate everybody else. When a quarterback is consistently missing receivers, how are you supposed to judge the receivers? How do you evaluate the offensive tackles if the quarterback isn't operating the offense correctly? How do you evaluate an entire group of players fighting for roster spots when possessions are falling apart because the ball isn't getting where it needs to go? That is why Cam Miller's performance matters. He is playing for his future, and this game gives him a chance to show that what happened last week doesn't define him. We could also see Mark Gronowski, the undrafted rookie quarterback out of Iowa. He has his own opportunity to show improvement after struggling as well. Nobody is asking these quarterbacks to suddenly look like stars. Miami simply needs the offense to function well enough that we can evaluate the rest of the roster. And that takes us directly to another fascinating group, the young wide receivers. One name Dolphins fans should be watching closely is Kevin Coleman Jr. The fifth-round rookie out of Missouri did not play in Miami's first preseason game, but he returned to practice this week. He had a strong practice when Miami worked on its own Tuesday, and during the joint practice he made a memorable catch despite taking a big hit from former Dolphin Javon Holland. Now we should get a chance to see Coleman in an actual Dolphins preseason game. That is exciting because there are opportunities in this receiver room. Caleb Douglas has been the standout wide receiver so far, and he gave everybody another reminder of that ability with the one-handed catch against Washington. But once the starters and some of the more established players leave Saturday's game, Coleman should have an opportunity to get meaningful snaps. And he isn't alone. There are veteran receivers trying to prove they deserve a place on this team, including Tutu Atwell, Terrace Marshall Jr., and Jalen Reagor. The pressure is real because the group as a whole needs players to separate themselves. Atwell, in particular, has disappointed in camp according to the discussion in the preview. That makes every preseason opportunity more important. Somebody has to step forward. Maybe it's Coleman. Maybe one of the veterans finally puts together the kind of performance Miami has been waiting to see. But again, that brings us back to the quarterbacks. These receivers need catchable footballs before anybody can fairly judge what they are doing. That is one reason I'm hoping the backup quarterback play is dramatically better this time around. There is also a familiar face on the other sideline that Dolphins fans will recognize immediately, Odell Beckham Jr. His time in Miami did not end particularly well. He eventually asked for his release, and now he is fighting for a roster spot with the Giants. He has reportedly been working with their first-team offense, but he is still on the roster bubble. That creates an interesting little storyline for Saturday. Could Beckham make a play against his former team? Could he turn this into a small revenge moment? It doesn't change anything for Miami, but it certainly gives Dolphins fans another reason to pay attention when he is